She had nothing left, but the cowboy still opened his ranch to the freezing Apache girl. The cold wind blew harshly across the empty New Mexico plains, carrying with it the bitter bite of winter. Snow had fallen the night before, covering the land in a thick white blanket. Every tree branch, every fence post, even the jagged rocks that stuck out from the frozen ground were dusted with frost. The world seemed silent, except for the occasional creak of a lone tree bending under the weight of snow or the distant howl of a coyote. It was a lonely, frozen landscape, the kind that could make a person feel small and lost. Through this frozen world, a figure struggled, moving slowly, each step heavy with exhaustion. It was a girl, no more than 16, her thin frame shivering under a tattered shawl that barely kept her warm. Her dark hair was damp and tangled, and her boots, once sturdy, were now worn and cracked from walking for miles through the snow. She carried a small bundle wrapped in a piece of cloth pressed tightly against her chest. Inside were her few belongings, mostly tokens of a life that had been abruptly shattered. She did not look back. She could not afford to. The girl's journey had begun before dawn that morning. She had fled her village after a raid had scattered her family and destroyed the small home where she had grown up. She had watched helplessly as the fire consumed everything familiar. There had been shouting, the clash of chaos and fear, and then as quickly as it had begun, it was over. She had escaped into the night, guided only by instinct and the hope that somewhere, far from the flames and the cold hatred of strangers, she might find safety. As the day wore on, her legs ached, her body felt numb, and her lips were cracked and bleeding from the icy wind. Each step was a battle against the cold and the weight of her despair. She stumbled once, nearly falling face first into the snow, but forced herself upright. She could not stop. She could not allow herself the luxury of collapse, even though her body demanded it. Every heartbeat was a reminder that she was alive, and that life, however difficult, was still something she had to hold on to. Meanwhile, John, a man in his late 40s, was riding along the edge of his property. He had lived on this ranch for most of his life, a solitary figure who knew every fence, every field, and every ridge of land in his care. He had been a cowboy for as long as he could remember, working the land and the animals, keeping to himself most of the time. But he had a deep respect for life and the world around him, a respect that had grown from years of hardship, and the understanding that survival often depended on kindness. That morning, as he checked his fences for damage from the winter storm, he noticed something unusual. There were footprints in the fresh snow, leading from the far edge of his property toward the creek that ran near his home. The prints were small, clearly made by a child or a young teen, and they were uneven, as though the person had been struggling to walk. John frowned, curiosity mixing with concern. It was rare for anyone to be out here alone in the middle of winter, especially a young girl. He followed the tracks carefully, his boots crunching softly in the snow. The wind made him squint, and his breath came in clouds, but he pressed on. After a few minutes, he saw her. She was lying near a clump of trees, half buried in snow, her body curled up as if trying to protect herself from the cold. Her face was pale, lips blue, and eyes barely open. John's heart tightened at the sight. Without hesitation, he dismounted and ran the final few steps to her side. "Hey," he said gently, kneeling beside her. "You okay?" The girl did not respond. Her body shivered violently, and it was clear she could not stand on her own. John acted quickly. He wrapped his coat around her and lifted her carefully into his arms, feeling how light and fragile she was. She pressed herself against him instinctively, seeking warmth from the human contact, though she did not speak or acknowledge him. John could feel the tremor of her body through the thick coat he wore. He carried her to his horse, adjusting her position so she would not slip. Mounting carefully, he held her close as the horse moved steadily back toward the ranch. The wind whipped around them, but John's attention never wavered from the girl. He knew that if he did not act quickly, the cold could take her before they reached shelter. Each step of the horse seemed painfully slow, but he was patient, focusing only on keeping her safe and warm. When they finally reached the ranch house, John moved her inside without a word, laying her gently on a thick quilt near the fireplace. He lit a fire quickly, the flames casting a warm glow across the room. The girl's shivering lessened slightly as the heat reached her, but she remained silent, curling into herself as though the warmth was unfamiliar. John went to the kitchen, returning with a bowl of hot water and a rag to wash her face and hands. She flinched at first, unsure of what to make of the stranger, but eventually allowed him to clean the dirt and frost from her skin. Her eyes, dark and wary, studied him carefully but did not yet trust. John spoke softly as he worked, never forcing a conversation. "You're safe here," he said. "I'll take care of you, that's all." Hours passed. The girl, exhausted and frozen, finally dozed near the fire, her breathing slow and steady. John watched her for a long time, remembering his own youth, the times he had been alone, the cold nights when he had wished for someone to care. He understood in a deep way the fear and loneliness that must have driven her to this place. He did not rush her, did not demand gratitude or answers. He simply sat in the rocking chair by the fire, watching over her, allowing the quiet of the ranch to surround them. Outside, the wind continued to howl, but inside the small house there was warmth and safety. The fire crackled softly, casting shadows on the walls, while the girl slept peacefully for the first time in days. John knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, finding her family or helping her build a new life if they were gone. But tonight, all that mattered was that she was alive, and that she had found a place, however temporary, where she could rest. As the night deepened, John reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought this girl to his doorstep. He had spent much of his life alone, focused on his work and the land he loved. People rarely stayed on the ranch for long, and he had grown accustomed to solitude. Yet in that quiet, frozen night, he felt something unfamiliar but powerful, a sense of purpose beyond the usual routines of ranch life. Perhaps helping someone in need was the most meaningful work of all. The girl, for her part, slept through the night, though her dreams were likely haunted by memories of loss and fear. But even in sleep, there was a subtle shift. The warmth, the presence of a kind stranger, and the safety of a roof over her head were small comforts, but they were enough to remind her that the world was not entirely cruel. Somewhere, beyond the snow and darkness, there was hope. By the time the first rays of morning light crept through the frost-covered windows, the girl was awake, though still wary. She rubbed her eyes, staring at the fire and then at John, who was already up, tending to the animals. There was no need for words yet. They would come in time. For now, they simply shared the quiet morning, two lives intersecting in a vast, lonely landscape, each offering something the other needed: warmth, safety, and the possibility of trust. Outside, the snow began to glisten under the rising sun, sparkling like tiny diamonds scattered across the land. The ranch, once silent and empty, now held the subtle sounds of life. The crackle of the fire, the soft shuffle of boots on the floor, and the gentle breathing of a girl who had found refuge. In that moment, both John and the girl understood, without speaking, that this was the beginning of something important. Something that would grow slowly, step by step, as winter slowly gave way to spring. The morning sun filled the small ranch house with a soft, golden light. Snow still clung to the trees outside, and the air smelled crisp and clean. Inside, the fire had burned low overnight, leaving just a warm glow across the wooden floor. The girl stirred, blinking against the light as she tried to wake fully. Her body was no longer shaking violently from the cold, though she still felt weak and exhausted. She rubbed her arms, feeling the lingering chill, and looked around the room with cautious eyes. John was already up, moving quietly around the kitchen. The aroma of freshly cooked oats and hot milk filled the air, comforting and familiar. He moved with calm efficiency, tending to his morning chores while keeping an eye on the girl. He knew that the first hours after a night of safety were the most delicate. She had endured so much, and trust could not be rushed. Every gesture mattered, every word had weight. "Here," John said gently, carrying a small bowl toward her. "Eat while it's warm." The girl looked at the food, unsure at first. She had gone days without proper meals, and her stomach growled painfully. Hunger competed with caution. Slowly, she reached for the bowl, her hands trembling slightly as she took it from him. John smiled softly, careful not to speak too much. The warmth of the oats was comforting, and with each bite she felt a little more grounded, a little more human again. After breakfast, John suggested they start with small chores. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for," he said. "Just some small things to keep busy." The girl hesitated. Her past had taught her to fear labor and control, to avoid drawing attention. But something in John's calm demeanor made her feel safe, almost invisible in the way he watched over her. She nodded slightly, and together they stepped outside. The cold air bit at her cheeks, but it was different from the freezing wind of the previous days. It was gentler, almost welcoming. John handed her a pair of gloves that were a little too big, and she slipped them on, fumbling as she tried to warm her fingers. They began with something simple, feeding the chickens. The girl watched carefully as John scattered feed, then mimicked his movements. She dropped a handful at first, scattering it awkwardly, but he did not laugh or scold. Instead, he nodded encouragingly. "Good," he said. "That's it, just like that." Small victories mattered in moments like this. Each tiny success built confidence, and slowly, the girl began to feel a sense of competence she hadn't known in weeks. The snow crunched under their boots as they moved toward the barn, and the girl found herself enjoying the rhythm of work, the simple satisfaction of doing something right. Inside the barn, John showed her how to check on the animals. "See the horses," he said. "They need water even in winter, and the cows, they like their hay warm in the morning." He worked carefully, showing her each step. She copied him, her hands clumsy at first, but she gradually learned to lift the pails, pour water, and check the animals with growing confidence. As the day wore on, the girl began to speak slowly at first. Her voice was quiet, hesitant, as if she were afraid it might anger someone if she said too much. "My name is Aeon," she said finally, barely above a whisper. John nodded, offering a kind smile. "Aeon," he repeated. "It's a good name. I'm John." The simplicity of their introductions made the moment feel important, almost ceremonial. They did not rush into questions about her past. There was time for that later. For now, there was warmth, safety, and work that allowed her to regain her strength. By late morning, the girl had started to move more freely around the ranch. She helped with sweeping the floors inside, gathering kindling and stacking hay. John watched her carefully, noting the small ways she seemed to relax. She laughed quietly when a chicken ran under her feet, and John found himself smiling in return. It was a lightness that had been missing from both their lives, a reminder that even after great hardship, life could still hold small joys. Lunch was another quiet moment of trust. John served bread, cheese, and warm soup. The girl ate slowly, her eyes occasionally darting toward him, testing his reaction. John did not demand conversation, only offering words of kindness when she looked his way. "You're doing well," he said simply. "That's important." After the meal, John took her outside again, this time for a longer walk around the property. The sun had risen higher, and the snow sparkled under the light, creating patterns of shadow and reflection that seemed almost magical. Aeon walked carefully, watching her step, but John stayed close, a steady presence at her side. "Do you know the land?" he asked gently. "Used to be part of it was mine, part of it belonged to my neighbors. It's quiet here, but it's alive if you know how to listen." Aeon shook her head. She had never had a place like this. Her family had traveled often, and even their village was small, limited. Here, the world seemed bigger, freer, and yet safer. She found herself listening, noticing details she had ignored before. The sound of snow melting from tree branches, the soft rustle of a bird in the distance, the way the wind moved through the valley. They returned to the house as the sun began to dip toward the horizon. The girl's steps were slower now, tiredness returning, but her posture was straighter, more confident. Inside, John prepared another fire while she rested on a quilt, her hands clasped around a mug of warm tea. The silence between them was comfortable now, not strained or fearful. Night fell over the ranch, bringing long shadows and a deep quiet. Aeon sat near the fire, watching the flames dance. John moved quietly, finishing his chores and checking the locks on the doors and windows. He knew the world outside could be harsh, but here within these walls they had built a small sanctuary. "Do you want to tell me more about yourself?" John asked, gently, sitting across from her. Aeon shook her head at first, but then, after a long pause, she spoke softly. She told him small pieces of her story. The village she had lived in, the people she had known, the times she had watched the world change in ways she could not control. She did not speak of everything, only what she could bear. John listened without interruption, his expression calm, patient. He understood that trauma could not be rushed, that trust was fragile. Over the next few days, this pattern continued. Aeon rested, worked, learned, and spoke when she was ready. She began to help more with chores, feeding the animals, tending the garden even in winter, and helping with small repairs around the house. She laughed more, smiled occasionally, and even asked questions about the animals or the land. Each day, the bond between her and John grew stronger, though unspoken. They had developed a rhythm. He offered guidance and protection. She offered trust and quiet companionship. The ranch itself became a teacher. Aeon learned the language of the land, the signs of weather, the habits of the animals. She learned patience, resilience, and the quiet joy of small accomplishments. John, in turn, found himself reminded of his own youth, of the lessons he had learned from the land and from people who had once cared for him. There was a gentle exchange of knowledge and understanding, a bridge forming between two very different lives. By the end of the week, Aeon could move around the ranch with confidence. She fed the chickens without spilling feed, checked the water for the animals efficiently, and even helped bring in firewood for the night. She began to sleep more soundly, no longer haunted by the immediate fear that had gripped her at the beginning of her journey. And though she had not fully spoken of her family or the loss she had endured, John knew she was healing in her own way, learning that there could be safety and kindness even in a world that had shown her cruelty. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant mountains, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink, Aeon and John stood together outside. The cold was less harsh now, and the air was filled with a quiet peace. Aeon looked at the horizon, then at John, and for the first time she smiled freely. John nodded, understanding the unspoken words. Life on the ranch would never erase the past, but it could offer a place to start again. And for Aeon, that beginning, fragile and uncertain, had arrived in the form of a small, snowy ranch, a warm fire, and a man who had chosen to care without expectation. The night fell, but the house was full of warmth, trust, and a sense of hope that neither had felt in a long time. And as the stars appeared, scattered across the dark sky, Aeon realized something quietly powerful. That even in a harsh world there could be moments of safety, moments of kindness, and moments where a life, no matter how broken, could begin to heal. The winter snow had started to melt, revealing patches of brown grass beneath the white blanket. The air was no longer as harsh and biting as it had been in the early days of Aeon's arrival. The mornings were still cold, and frost lingered in the corners of the fields, but there was a promise of warmth in the sun and a softness in the wind that had not been there before. Aeon noticed it first when she stepped outside to feed the chickens one morning. The snow beneath her boots had begun to shrink, revealing the dry earth, and she felt a flicker of hope she had not realized she was missing. John had been up for hours already, as usual. He was out near the barn, checking the horses and beginning to mend a fence that the last storm had damaged. Aeon watched him from the porch, her small hands clutching a cup of hot tea. She felt a mix of admiration and nervousness. The ranch was a big place and she still had much to learn, but each day she was learning more, becoming stronger, more capable. "Ready to start today?" John asked, not looking up, but his voice carried warmth and encouragement. Aeon nodded, finishing her tea and setting the cup down carefully. "Yes," she replied softly. John smiled faintly and gestured toward the barn. "Let's start with the horses. They need brushing before feeding." The barn smelled of hay and animals, familiar yet comforting. The horses stirred as Aeon approached, their soft nostrils sniffing the air. John handed her a brush and showed her the proper way to stroke the horse's coat, moving slowly from head to tail. Aeon's hands were careful at first, unsure if she was doing it correctly, but John's steady guidance helped her find confidence. "Good," John said after a few moments. "They like it when you're gentle, always gentle." Aeon nodded, repeating the movements, her strokes becoming smoother, more confident. The horses leaned into her touch, and she felt a sense of accomplishment that made her chest swell with quiet pride. For the first time in a long while, she felt useful, needed, and alive. After brushing the horses, John led her to the smaller fields where the cows grazed. "They need water and hay," he explained. "Some of the older ones can be stubborn, but patience is the key." Aeon took the bucket and followed him, carefully pouring water into the troughs and scattering hay across the ground. One cow nudged her arm gently as if to test her, and she froze for a moment, then smiled. "It's okay," she whispered, remembering John's calm example. She stepped aside, allowing the cow to drink, feeling the connection between herself and the animals grow stronger with every task she completed. By midday, Aeon was sweaty and tired, but she felt stronger than she had in weeks. She had learned new skills, worked alongside John, and felt the satisfaction of completing real work. John clapped her gently on the shoulder. "You're doing well, Aeon, more each day." Lunch was simple but hearty. Bread, cheese, and stew filled their stomachs, and Aeon ate with a newfound appreciation. She had been hungry in both body and spirit when she first arrived, and now each meal felt like a gift. She looked at John as he ate, realizing how much patience he had shown, how he had never forced her to speak or act before she was ready. "You've learned a lot in a short time," John said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Most people take months to do what you can already do." Aeon looked down, feeling shy at the praise. I try," she said softly. "Trying is all anyone can ask," John replied. "And you're doing more than that. You're learning and you're careful. That matters." The afternoon was warmer, and John suggested they check the fences together. Aeon had never thought much about fences before, but now she understood their importance. They kept animals safe, marked property lines, and gave structure to the land. John showed her how to lift heavy posts, hammer nails carefully, and repair broken boards. At first, her movements were awkward, but John guided her patiently. With each board secured, she felt a small victory, a sense of accomplishment that added to her growing confidence. By the time the work was done, the sun was beginning to lower in the sky. The fields glowed with the soft light of late afternoon, and the snow that had remained began to sparkle like tiny crystals. Aeon stood beside John, looking out over the ranch, and felt a strange mixture of awe and peace. She had never known a place so vast, so alive, yet so quiet. It was a different world from the village she had fled, and she was beginning to feel that she belonged here, in small ways at least. As they walked back toward the house, John asked softly, "Do you ever miss your family?" Aeon's steps slowed, and she looked down. "Every day," she admitted, "but I don't know where they are. I don't know if they're alive." John nodded slowly, his expression gentle but serious. "That's hard, I know, but being here, safe and learning, doesn't mean you're forgetting them. It just means you're surviving until you can find out more. You're staying alive for them, even if you don't know it yet." Aeon thought about that as she stepped into the warm house. She could feel the truth in John's words. Survival was not just about hiding or fleeing. It was about learning, growing, and taking each day as it came. She understood that she was stronger than she had realized. The evening brought another chance for quiet connection. John taught her to cook a simple meal, showing her how to chop vegetables, stir the stew, and tend the fire while it simmered. Aeon listened carefully, repeating his instructions, and soon the kitchen smelled of delicious food. As they ate, the conversation was soft but meaningful. She asked about the ranch, about John's life, and in return he asked her small questions, not pressing her to speak about her past too deeply. Over the next few days, Aeon's routine became steadier. She learned to ride a horse with more skill, tending to the animals more independently, and even helping John with minor repairs around the property. Each task she mastered strengthened her confidence, and she began to feel a sense of pride in her abilities. She was no longer just the frightened girl who had stumbled onto the ranch. She was a helper, a learner, and a presence in the household that mattered. John watched her carefully, noticing subtle changes. Her posture was more upright, her movements more sure, her voice more confident when she spoke. She laughed more often, especially when a horse or cow did something unexpected, and she began to share small stories from her past, not the painful ones, but memories of simpler days, of friends, and of the small joys she had once known. One evening, as the sky turned soft shades of pink and purple, John and Aeon sat on the porch together. The air was cool but not harsh, and the landscape stretched before them, quiet and still. Aeon picked up a small piece of straw, twirling it between her fingers, and said quietly, "I never thought I'd see a place like this where everything feels safe." John nodded, his gaze steady on the horizon. "Sometimes the world gives us places like this, even after it seems cruel. We just have to be ready to find them. And you're ready, Aeon, you've come a long way." The words warmed her in a way that no fire could. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope. She was learning, growing, and beginning to trust. And she knew, quietly, that John was someone she could count on, not just to provide warmth or food, but to guide her through the days when life felt heavy. Winter continued to loosen its grip, and with each passing day, the ranch became more than a refuge. It became a place of learning, of growth, and of subtle joy. Aeon began to take initiative, performing tasks without direction, noticing small details, and even helping John plan for the animals and fields. Each action was a small assertion of independence, a step toward a life that was slowly becoming her own. By the end of the third week, the bond between Aeon and John was undeniable. It was not spoken, but it was visible in the way they worked together, moved through the space of the ranch, and shared quiet moments of reflection. They had become companions in survival, teachers and learners, and quiet friends who understood each other without needing to say much. One night, as they sat by the fire, Aelin finally asked a question she had been holding in. "John, do you think I could really belong here?" John looked at her, his eyes soft but serious. "Yes," he said simply. "You belong anywhere you choose to care for and work for, and here on this ranch you're already part of it. You just have to believe it yourself." Aelin smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached her eyes. She felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a sense of belonging she had not known since before her journey began. For the first time, she felt that perhaps she could face the future with strength and hope, that the world was not entirely cruel, and that kindness could exist even in unexpected places. As the fire crackled and the night deepened, Aelin closed her eyes, feeling a peace that had been foreign to her for so long. Outside, the ranch was quiet, but inside there was warmth, learning, and the unspoken promise of safety. And in that quiet night, she realized something profound. That life, even after loss, could grow again, slowly, carefully, and with the guidance of those willing to care. Spring had begun to arrive on the ranch. The snow that had once covered every inch of land was melting into rivulets that ran through the fields, carrying the promise of warmer days. The trees, bare for months, were starting to show tiny buds of green, and the air was filled with the fresh scent of earth awakening. The sun no longer felt harsh or distant. Its warmth was gentle, almost welcoming. For Aelin, the changing season mirrored the change within herself. She felt stronger, more confident, and more at home than she had in months. The morning began with the familiar sounds of the ranch. Chickens clucked and scratched in the yard, horses shifted in their stalls, and the cows moved slowly toward the feeding area. Aelin had learned to wake early, preparing water and feed before John even emerged from the house. She moved with purpose, her steps confident, her hands steady. Where she had once been hesitant and fearful, she now moved like someone who knew the rhythm of life around her. John appeared on the porch, stretching his arms and taking a deep breath of the crisp morning air. He watched Aelin with quiet pride. She had come so far since the day she had stumbled onto his ranch, shivering and alone. Now she was a part of the land, a presence that brought life and energy to a place that had been quiet and lonely for too long. "Good morning," he said warmly, nodding toward her. Aelin smiled and returned the greeting. "Good morning, John. The animals are ready." Together, they moved through the morning chores. Aelin fed the chickens, brushed the horses, and checked the cows' water, performing each task with precision. John worked alongside her, teaching her new skills as they went. He showed her how to mend a broken fence board more efficiently, how to guide the horses safely to the pasture, and how to notice signs in the land that indicated weather changes or animal behavior. Each lesson strengthened her connection to the ranch, and she absorbed the knowledge quickly, eager to prove herself capable. By mid-morning, John suggested they plant a small garden in one of the cleared fields. "Spring is here," he said. "The earth is ready. A garden can feed us and the animals, and it gives the land life. It's also a good way to learn patience." Aelin felt a thrill at the idea. She had never planted a garden before, but she wanted to try. With John's guidance, she helped till the soil, carefully placing seeds in neat rows, covering them with earth and watering them gently. She imagined the green shoots breaking through the soil in the coming weeks, a sign of growth and renewal. The act of planting felt symbolic, a way to leave behind the fear and loss she had endured and to start building something positive in her life. As they worked, they spoke quietly about small things, the weather, the animals, and stories of the ranch from John's past. Aelin shared memories of her village, small and happy recollections that she had kept tucked away, like hidden treasures. John listened with patience, never pressing for more than she was ready to give. Through these conversations, trust grew deeper, a steady bond built on respect, kindness, and shared labor. The afternoon brought a new challenge. One of the younger horses had injured its leg slightly, and John showed Aelin how to tend to it carefully. She watched his movements closely, then tried her hand at gently cleaning and wrapping the wound. At first, her hands trembled, but John guided her with calm instruction, and she began to feel competent and capable. By the time they were finished, the horse was calm, and Aelin felt a deep satisfaction in her ability to help. It was a small act, but it reinforced the sense of belonging she had developed on the ranch. Evening came, painting the sky in shades of pink, orange, and gold. The garden they had planted glimmered in the light, and the animals settled into their stalls and pens. Aelin and John sat on the porch, enjoying the quiet beauty of the land. For the first time, Aelin allowed herself to feel contentment, free from fear or worry. She had survived winter, learned the ways of the ranch, and grown stronger in both body and spirit. "Do you think this is my home?" she asked softly, her voice almost a whisper. John looked at her, his eyes gentle but firm. "Home isn't just a place, Aelin. It's where you are safe, where you are cared for, and where you can grow. And here, you have all three. This is your home if you want it to be." Aelin smiled, a small but genuine smile, feeling warmth spread through her chest. She had feared the world, feared being alone, and yet here she was. She had a place to belong, someone who cared, and a life that was slowly unfolding with hope and possibility. The following days were filled with work, learning, and small joys. Aelin tended the animals independently, repaired fences, and helped John with larger projects around the ranch. She became skilled at reading the land, noticing signs of approaching weather, and understanding the habits of the animals. John continued to teach her with patience and quiet guidance, always allowing her to grow at her own pace. One morning, while checking the garden, Aelin noticed tiny green shoots breaking through the soil. She knelt beside them, running her fingers gently through the soft earth. "Look, John," she called, "they're growing." John came over and smiled. "Yes, they are, just like you. Growth takes time, patience, and care, and look at you, see how far you've come." Aelin's eyes shone with pride. She realized that the garden was more than just plants. It was a symbol of her own journey. Each sprout represented survival, learning, and the promise of a brighter future. She had started as a frightened, lost girl, and now she was someone who could care for herself, contribute meaningfully, and face each day with confidence. As spring deepened, the ranch became alive with new sounds. Birds returned, singing in the trees. The animals thrived with the warmer weather and attentive care. The garden grew steadily, bringing color and life to the once gray winter landscape. Aelin felt a deep connection to all of it, the land, the animals, and John, who had become both mentor and friend. She realized that the ranch was no longer just a refuge. It was a place where she could flourish. One afternoon, while repairing a fence near the edge of the property, Aelin paused to look out across the fields. The wind was warm now, carrying the scent of earth and new growth. She felt a sense of peace she had never known before. Life had been harsh, but it had also led her here to a place where she was safe, capable, and valued. She understood in a quiet, deep way that she could face whatever challenges might come next, because she had learned resilience, patience, and trust. That evening, John and Aelin sat together by the fire, sharing a simple meal. They spoke softly, reflecting on the changes of the past months. Aelin shared memories of her past, this time with more comfort and confidence. John listened, offering guidance, understanding, and encouragement. Their conversations were no longer cautious or hesitant. They were open, warm, and filled with mutual respect. As the night settled over the ranch, the stars shining brightly in the clear sky, Aelin felt a sense of completion. She had survived the cold, faced the fear of being alone, and learned to trust and grow. The ranch, once an unfamiliar place, had become her home. John, once a solitary figure, had found companionship, purpose, and connection through helping her. Aelin realized that life, even after loss, could be rebuilt with patience, care, and kindness. She had learned that safety, trust, and belonging were possible, even in a harsh world. And as she closed her eyes by the warm fire, she felt hope, strength, and the quiet certainty that she could face the future with courage. The next morning, Aelin woke early, as she had become accustomed. She dressed quickly and stepped outside, breathing in the warm spring air. The garden awaited her, the animals needed tending, and the land stretched before her with endless possibilities. She felt alive, capable, and connected. John joined her shortly after, and together they worked on the ranch, side by side, two lives intertwined by circumstance, choice, and trust. By the end of the day, Aelin had accomplished more than she could have imagined months before. She had built strength, confidence, and a sense of belonging. And as the sun set over the fields, casting golden light over the land, she realized that she had found not just a home, but a future. A life that, while born of hardship, had grown into something beautiful, enduring, and full of promise.